Welcome to the Arts Page. I'm Sandy Max. Art meets history for the artists in this episode. We start with Margaret Muza. She grew up in the Bayview neighborhood and is the current artist in residence at the Pfister Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. Muza specializes in collodion wet plate photography, a process that creates images by using chemicals and darkroom development. In her modern-day studio, Muza takes us back to the 1800s.
I read an article about this process that was describing how you could still take a photograph the way that they were taken during the Civil War. When I read that you could still take photographs that way, I just thought, I have to learn how to do that. I just got really curious about what made a photograph look the way that they used to. There's something a little bit haunting about them. The cameras are so beautiful, and the things that these old lenses capture is something that, our iPhones just can't. The wet plate process is an old photographic method that uses wet chemistry to make an image instead of, say, film or negatives. I use aluminum plates and glass plates. So then I use a collodion, which is a liquid emulsion that I pour onto that plate, which becomes light sensitive through a series of chemical steps. It sits in a bath of silver nitrate, where it becomes light sensitive in the darkroom. And then I use developer that I make myself and an old varnish recipe that's a Civil War era recipe. This process really attracted me because it's a little bit unpolished. So the image is kind of messy. There's lots of artifacts that show up, little smears, fingerprints, and I like the look of that. I really like photographing people. Someone by themselves is really like my ideal subject. I really like to be able to focus on every aspect of someone's face, lighting them perfectly, and then developing them perfectly. I really like to take time and think about what makes an interesting photograph artistically. I like to play with the focal points and the light and shadows that daylight creates. I like that a lot. My favorite photograph I've ever taken is of my mom, which I took really recently. She had found some old rusty rings that she found around the cabin, and she hung them up on the porch and just delicately wrapped some grapevines around them. And so they created this natural frame. So I kind of placed her in the background and used that frame in the foreground to kind of make an oval around her. And she was holding a bundle full of grapes that she had picked from the grapevines there. I think the best compliment that I've ever gotten about one of my images was just, "That is art." Someone looked at one of my images and said, "That is art." I had a broken record in my car because I had been given a bunch of records from someone who was moving away. And one of them was broken, and I thought, this might fit into the plate holder, and I could probably take a picture on this. So I was just by myself and no one really walked in, and I thought, I'm just gonna do a self-portrait and see if it'll work on this record. I didn't clean it off, so there's fingerprints on that image that are not necessarily mine, and it's a really old record, so who knows whose fingerprints are on that. I had no idea how I would be framed on something round and also broken, and without being on the other side of the camera, focusing, I was the focal point. So a lot of things could have gone wrong, but it all lined up really well, and I'm really proud of that image. I use a lot of old cameras, old lenses. The one I use the most is an 8x10 camera from 1903 with an old portrait lens. These machines are really simple. Really, it's kind of just a box with a lens on it, so it's not a complicated machine at all. That's what's amazing about them. Even though they're so old, I'm using them over 100 years later. And I love that about them because most of our modern technology doesn't work after 2 or 3 years. The first time I saw a tintype appearing in the Fixer, I felt like I had seen a ghost. I got goosebumps and my eyes watered because it was so spooky and so beautiful. And I thought, how did that happen? How can this image be before my eyes? Which is something we don't think about when we're looking at images on a screen. So there's complete magic there, and I still feel that way every time I take a picture. I'm always surprised by what I see. It always turns out differently than I imagined. So I'm kind of addicted to that moment, and that's what really keeps me going. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how when I was little, we had a suitcase full of photographs that my mom had in her room of us when we were little that she took with her film camera. And so we loved going up there and looking through them all. And I think that today, kids growing up won't be able to do that because most of these images that we're taking are digital and they're on our phones or just on a computer and they don't get printed out. So I always worry that those images one day will just be lost in the changing of formats. So I am really proud of the fact that the images I make are physical and that because they're on metal, they last a long time. So they become something that generations in the future will have. This process is fulfilling because it still really challenges me. I think because I have so much to learn yet, I'm still really hooked and it hasn't let me go, because I really am challenged by it constantly and I want to master it.